Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today we're going to make some fabric necklaces using leftover strips of fabric, either jelly roll or something wider if you want an easier version. And we're also going to be using, don't make a mess, these kind of trimmings from your thread catcher bin or wherever these end up in your sewing room. So let's get started. Okay, so this is where I got the idea from. This is a necklace I bought in Poland several years ago. These are something hard. Wooden beads, plastic, I'm not really sure what's in here. And then they're just wrapped around fabric. So we're going to take this idea, but instead of these hard beads, I don't wear this a lot because it's kind of heavy, drags on my neck. So instead of these, we're going to use our fabric trimmings. So I made two different sizes, so you can either use a jelly roll strip or a wider strip. Mine was 6 inches wide. We need some fabric trimmings to stuff it with, and then optionally, you can also use this as an opportunity to use up some thread from the end of your bobbins. So I'll show you what I do with that in a minute. So whatever size strip you're using, all I'm doing is folding it right side to right side and sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. I am putting a little bit of a back stitch, but not quite at the edge. I'm doing it like, I don't know, like a 1/2 inch down from the edge. You'll see why we need to be able to kind of get the mouth of this tube open to put our little fabric balls in, really. So anyway, but you're just sewing one long inside out tube, and then we're going to turn it around. Next, we need to turn this tube right side out again. This is much easier with the wider strip than with the jelly roll strip. This is about as hard as it's going to get. But basically, if you don't have any other of those fancy tools for turning a tube round, this is what I tend to do, which is put a safety pin on the end of the tube, drop the safety pin inside, and then push it through with a chopstick. And that usually does the job for me. You then just have to kind of wiggle the tube off the end of the chopstick. It can get a bit fiddly, but it works out, and it's easier for me than doing it another way. I do have a little clover tool that's for this kind of thing somewhere around the sewing room, but I couldn't find it, so I had to go back to the chopstick and the safety pin, but use whatever method works for you, obviously. So all I'm doing here is the same again with the much wider strip. So this is the one that's 6 inches by, I think it was a little longer than 44 inches, maybe 48, something like that. But this is it's an approximation thing. We're going to test it to make sure the necklace fits our necks. So don't worry about it, but it has to be fairly long. Even if you're going to make a collar sort of a necklace. I'll show you because it kind of shrinks up with what we're doing. So anyway, this is the wider strip, and then I'm going to turn that one around, and then we'll get to those fabric trimmings. The wider your strip, the easier it is to turn it right side round. This one, I didn't even bother using the chopstick. I just used my fingers. So whatever works for you. Next, we need to make our replacement beads. So we're not using those hard ones. We're using fabric trimming beads is essentially what we're going to make. Basically just balls of fabric trimmings, which for me is kind of anything that is too small to hold a seam or that I don't want to put in my crumb box for whatever reason. And then we're going to secure it into a somewhat ball-like shape. We don't need to be super precise with this, but a somewhat circle type shape using either a long trimming that you can kind of wrap around and tie in a knot, or what I'm doing here is using the end of some thread on a bobbin. So, when you finish a project and you have a little bit of the thread left over, obviously, if you're hopping to that color again, you can just use it, but sometimes it's a very specific color that and you have that sort of end of a bobbin sitting in your drawer for ages, so we can use it up on this. Now, what size we make these balls depends on what size strip we use. So if you use the jelly roll strip, they need to be pretty small. This is about the maximum I could do for the jelly roll strip. It's about the same, a little bit shorter than my bobbin. You can see I put it up next to it there. Then you just kind of have to squish it in the top of the tube. It's harder for this jelly roll version than it is for the bigger strip, which I'll show you in another second as well. But once you've got it shoved in there, all you need to do is grab that chopstick again and push it through to the middle. If you don't have a chopstick, then anything else that's long and thin that you can use to push, but not with a sharp end because we don't want to poke holes in anything. In order to find the middle, just fold your strip in half and put a little clip on it, and then you'll know how far you need to push the ball through to. So as I'm pushing that fabric ball into the thinner strip, I thought I'd also show you over on the other side how big you can make the balls if the strip is bigger. So I'm using some bigger scraps, a seam off of something, no idea. And this one fits about in the palm of my hand, and I can measure it up against the tube. And once that's the size I want, it's so much easier to just pop that inside and drop it in. It's when you get to the small scale of the little jelly roll and the tiny fabric bead that it's a little bit more fiddly. So you can choose the size you like. In any case, once we've got our fabric bead in the middle, all we're going to do is tie a knot super tight on either side of it to keep it where we want it in the middle. And then we're going to keep adding beads and keep tying knots until we have as many beads as we like. So the more beads you want to add, the longer your strip has to be, because as we tie, we're shortening that strip, right? Because we're using up some of the fabric in the knot, if that makes sense. So I ended up making 5 big beads for this blue necklace and 7 small ones for the black one. And I've got 2 different ways that we can finish off the ends of these once we've tested it, obviously, against the length we want it to be. If we want it to be more like a choker collar thing, or if we want it to drape down our chest, you're going to have to make it different lengths. So all I'm doing here, after I tested this one on myself, is trim the ends to a matching length. And then I'm going to show you 2 ways to finish the ends. So the first way, and probably the fanciest way, is to use these what's called jewelry findings or necklace findings. These ones I think are usually referred to as pinchers or crimp ends. I'll put a link in the description. Anyway, it's basically got some, if you can see it, some little tiny sharp teeth, and we're going to squish it onto the end of the fabric to hide the raw edges and to give us the clasp and the little bit of chain that makes it a necklace you can take on and off without tying it. So what I've done is folded in the edges because my strip is wider than the crimp end that I have. They come in different sizes. And I just happen to have this size in my craft room. So I was just testing it there to see, is it wide enough? And then once I've got it folded the way I want it to, so I just kind of folded the ends in almost like you'd do a present, I guess, to make it fit. And then I folded the raw edge under twice. So folded it and then folded it to hide it. And then I'm clamping the crimp thing onto the end. So first I kind of squeeze it on my fingers, and then I'll do it with some pliers. Now you don't have to do that double fold thing I did. You can just stick the raw edges into the crimp end if your fabric's the same width as your thing. But anyway, this is how I chose to do it. I'm sure you can fiddle around and experiment and find the best way that works for you. But all you got to do is make sure that's good and clamped on, and you can test it and make sure it doesn't budge, and you should be fine. Now, if you don't want to buy any hardware and you just want to finish your necklace off with fabric ends that you tie in a knot, I'll show you just a little way to sew the ends, which is what I did with the black necklace, just so you don't have those raw edges. So that's what I'll show you next. So all I did for the black one was tuck the raw edges in, kind of like we were doing before when we were turning it inside out, and then fold it over into a little half triangle. Hopefully you can see that. I know my fingers are sort of in the way, but little half triangle, and do that on both sides. So you shouldn't have any raw edges anywhere, and then we just have to stitch that down, and then you'll have little pointy edges, which is just a little bit prettier on the end of your knot than if we just stitched it straight. You could do it. I did it in these little points, trimmed off my threads, and that was me done. And here's a little picture of the 2 options. So here's the big one with the, can you see it? The clasp at the back there. So definitely a bit chunkier and more of a statement, I guess. And then the small one. And this one's much lighter. I mean, obviously it's got less fabric in it and it doesn't have the clasp. This is comfier for me, and I think I like it better. So I think I'm more likely to wear, even though it's fiddlier to make, I think I'm more likely to wear this one more often. The other one, I'd need a particular kind of outfit, I think. But anyway, it was fun to use up some scraps that were just sitting around. I'll have to make a lot more of these if I really want to use all those up. I do have other videos with ideas for ways you can use up more of your trimmings. I'll link those in the description, but just thought it was a fun idea to share. Hope you liked it. Do let me know if you make one, and do also let me know if you've got other fab ideas for using your sewing trimmings. If you're not already subscribed, please do, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.